Three, two, one. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're at in the U.S. or somewhere in the world. Thanks for joining us on Baseball Outside the Box. This is the show which loves to challenge the status quo. We bring on some great guests. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Hey, before we start real quick, I want to thank everybody. We're over 100 countries that we have coaches, players, and parents listening to, and that is a thrill. Hello to ESPN Honolulu, my friends there. We are there live all the time, and we are excited about it. And don't forget, we're going to talk about a lot of things, but right now, in a minute here, we're going to have Dr. Bob Weil, and he's got a fantastic book. And speaking about books, I want you to go to humankinetics.com. And I do have a youth baseball drills book for young coaches if you're interested, but not more importantly than that, go to humankinetics.com because use the code HKSAVE20A, and it'll be in the show notes. You get 20% off. There's unbelievable books there in all sports, all aspects of development. So check it out. We are now working with humankinetics.com, great organization worldwide. Special thanks to our guests, and also special thanks to everybody in the U.S. and around the world. Don't forget, go to baseballoutsidethebox.com, the audio, and also go to YouTube, Peter Caliendo. Subscribe to both and get free updates. And we are live on Facebook. If you got any questions on Facebook, do me a favor, write them in the comments section. This is an important topic, a great topic. And let me introduce our guest, Dr. Bob Weil. Bob has been a friend of mine for over 30 years, one of the best in the business. He's been in the radio industry for 30 years, a sports podiatrist, also sports medicine expert. He's in the National Fitness Hall of Fame in 2019. When I met him, he was working with Bill Buckner. He's worked with the Olympians. He's fantastic. We're going to get right to introducing him so that way we can get going with the show. So, Dr. Weil, how you doing, my friend?
Hey, Peter, flattery will get you everywhere, you know?
Yeah.
Really.
And if I would have gone over everything that you have done in your lifetime, we would have been here a few hours.
I'm telling you, we're still trying. Bill Buckner, great memory. He passed away not all that long ago. And I have a picture of Bill. He was part of Eric Soderholm's baseball school that my son Adam went to, along with Chad Soderholm's son. And Billy was a fantastic player. He first came to Chicago on who's going to really work that ankle. And he came to visit Sports Fitness Institute and Bob Guida, and mixed into the world of all those years ago were you and your whole baseball situation. So I'm proud of the things that you're doing. Outside the box is a good place to be. And, the safety of youth sports, the challenge of youth sports is an area that's a big business, Peter.
Absolutely. And I wanted to start with that because we're going to talk about the business of baseball and also the business of sports. But I wanted to mention, you wrote a book called HeySportsParents. It's kind of our topic today, educating sports parents, but also, talking about all the injuries that are occurring at the youth level. We're going to specify it towards baseball, but talk about the book and also the radio show.
Yes. I've hosted a radio show called The Sports Doctor for decades. And I've had hundreds and hundreds of guests, whether it was in the world of high performance, whether it was in the world of sports parenting, whether it was in the world of preventing injuries, the role of the foot in sports, et cetera, et cetera. It's become very, very aware. Everybody can close their eyes and imagine the last time they heard a ranting, raving parent on the sideline in a Little League game, or the nightmare with some of the coaches or doctors and drugs and whatever we've seen in children's and youth sports. And the fact that it is a big business, it's funny, there's a documentary, eventually it's coming out. My friend Joe Franco, co-founder of Chesapeake Films, is creating a documentary called Where Our Children Play, The Challenge of Youth Sports. And when I first was consulting with him, Peter, a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, when he was really putting this beginning together, he said it's a $15 billion a year business, Dr. Bob. And as we would discuss it, as we went along with the development, bringing together so many different expertise in this whole challenge of youth sports, is every time I would talk to him again, the price went up. as far as how big a business it was, to where
20 billion,
today,
right?
yes, the idea and the pressure on boys and girls to play hurt or to take over the counter pain medicine to stay in the game, or to start seeing in your sport things like the famous Tommy John surgery. Everybody's heard of Tommy John surgery, one of the most successful surgical procedures in any sport. The fact that a lot of it's being done on adolescents. And
Wow.
here we are with all these years of paying big attention, like you have forever, the world of baseball, to too much and overkill, too much throwing, too many pitches, too much jumping in so many of the different sports. So one of my radio guests, Peter, the Yankees, great team physician, young orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Chris Ahmad, was just writing an article on LinkedIn about the kind of specialization in young baseball players, and again, overuse,
Hmm.
things we call repetitive motion injuries, the thing we're doing constantly. In my world of youth figure skating, where we have, again, 10, 11, 12-year-olds running and jumping all day, we might see these overuse problems in the lower extremity. So my co-author, Hall of Fame volleyball player, Sharky Zartman, again, here's the very cool. I came up with the idea of saying it's a hashtag.
Yeah.
Hashtag HeySportsParents. The only
Today,
mistake we made is we didn't include hashtag HeySportsParents. And I'm also writing for a very exciting new magazine called MVP Parent. Again, the topic, Peter, dealing with these epidemic of overuse injuries in youth sports, both physically and mentally.
hmm,
Both physically and mentally. And again, it doesn't matter whether your sport is tennis, whether your sport is soccer, whether your son or daughter is a dancer, whether they are, once they start going to camps and start specializing earlier and earlier. I have a chapter in the book called The Prodigy Sports. And everybody tells sports parents, Peter, and coaches, we want boys and girls to play multiple sports. We want them to grow up playing multiple sports, experiencing different sports. Maybe they start specializing later on in adolescence. And it's a great axiom, and everybody wants to do it, unless your son or daughter is a figure skater or a gymnast
right.
or a baseball player down south where they could play year round
Sure.
or whatever. And we start seeing the pressure of specializing. And we make a big deal about that challenge of, I tell any parent of a young athlete to connect yourself with a good physical therapist or personal trainer who can help you do what's right and stay away from what's wrong as far as physical training involving a particular sport. So the book in its first segment is called Sports Parenting 101. And Sharky shares her endless experience, not only as a great player growing up as a youngster in the world of volleyball, which is another prodigy sport, but her years and years of coaching, including abusive coaches and that whole topic. The second part of the book, Peter, is called The Sports Doctor's In. This is my segment where I'm talking about things like what's the best shoe for your son or daughter? What are some of the common foot problems we might see? I talk a lot about my friend Gary Reinl, who wrote the book Ice, the illusionary treatment option, about that whole topic regarding acute and overuse injuries. You know, acute injuries happen right away. Overuse injuries, a lot of times, I don't remember when my son's ankle started bothering him. It's just he's playing 10 games a week. You know, youth baseball, you might have someone playing triple headers still
Mm-hmm.
in this day and age. And everybody and his uncle knows how many pitch counts they think they know. Yet there is so much young arm problems, And again, usually it fits in. So in that second chapter, I talk about concussions. I bring in experts. The third part of the book, Peter, is called Ask the Experts. I have 8 different experts, again, physical training, mental training, adult child psychiatry, coaching, nutrition, and their input on what it takes to have a healthy young boy or girl athlete in whatever the sport happens to be. The fourth segment of the book is called Parents' Perspectives, and I include about a half a dozen parents of different sports sharing their, and there's a lot of great things about youth sports. There's a lot of positive things, and we pay attention to that, and they share their experiences. Um, but again, the idea of having younger and younger, just this morning, again, I saw a 10-year-old figure skater, and she probably does 100 double jumps a week.
Wow.
How aggressive is that?
Wow.
Or if you put a tennis uniform on her, she might be playing tennis
Right.
5, 6 days a week. And Lou Vickery, who you and I spoke about before we started the show, Lou Vickery pitched for the Yankees and Cardinals in the 60s. His pitching coach, I think, with the Yankees was Whitey Ford. Yeah, Lou has written a dozen books. He's a consultant in the whole mental side of success. And he had a show called Lou in the Morning down in Florida, Pensacola area. And I was the sports doctor's, and I was a guest once a month for 3, 4 years. And it was such a big deal. Again, down there, they play baseball year round.
Yeah.
And again, they were in the middle of the same contest, which was, why is it that Little League 25 years ago, 20 years ago, woke up one day and said, holy cow, we got 30, 40% of these kids don't want to come back and play.
Right.
What's wrong here? Right?
Yeah.
Our good friend, we just talked about him, the late Jim Vickery. Jim was one of our country's groundbreaking sports psychologists. Although back then, well, I knew him in the late 70s and 80s, and he shared the radio show with me in the early 90s. He didn't use the word psychology,
No.
scared people. He was a performance enhancement consultant,
Yes.
right? But he would talk, I would drag him along with me, Peter, when we would talk to Little League parents, when my son was in Little League and Pony League at the time. I might be talking to parents about, again, when to use ice and what about shoes and what are some common injuries and all of these kinds of things. And Jim would talk about parental behavior,
Mm-hmm.
and he would lay out some of the things. He'd make a big deal. Number one to him was to parents, sports parents, don't be a critic. He would say, stop being your son or daughter's biggest critic,
Yep.
And put this in perspective.
Yeah.
All the time, we would hear the question, pardon me, many times coaches and parents, doctors, on whose goal is it? Is it this young kid who's a very talented shortstop? Is this his goal, or is it mom and dad's goal? Well, the
Right.
coach, now the young figure skater who grew up here in Naperville, Illinois, Evan Lysacek, was 10 years old when I put 9.5 when I put orthotics in his skates. 13 years later, he was the Olympic gold medalist. I'm still celebrating. It was the 10th anniversary last year.
Yes. Love
I
that.
told him I'd show his slides. I said at the Buckner, I said, I'm going to show slides of me and you, for the next 100 years. But Evan's mom, and again, if people go, Peter, to sportsdoctorradio.com,
Mm-hmm.
if they go to radio shows, if they go back far enough, they might find you as
Yeah.
one of my guests, besides recently, even years and years ago, guests all over the world on so many different topics, and listen to whatever they would like. But a couple of months after the Olympics, I had Evan's mom, Tanya Lysacek, on the radio. And I asked her that question. How did you know whose goal it was with this young kid who was so special he would become the best in the world? And, Olympic gold medal is nothing quite like it,
Mm-hmm.
really. And she said, Dr. Bob, we had ice time at 6:15 in the morning. I never had to wake Evan up. There he was in the car, man, with his gloves on. ready to go to practice. I said, if I was writing a book, I couldn't come up with a better answer on whose goal it was. Jim Vickery, one of his other things was for parents to be a good listener. Um, Again, we have young players who feel tremendous stresses, especially, this past year where everything's been upside down and there's been incredible challenges on parents, and school sports being canceled and all of these other things, um, coming back much too aggressively
Mm-hmm.
is a big concern. There's injuries all over the place because everybody's in a hurry. Hey, we're in practice next week. Show up, and we'll see what happens. There was a spring training this year as we speak, right? Right now, it's opening day.
Day today. And matter of fact, I wanted to ask you about that because since you mentioned that, coming back, okay, major league players, they've got spring training. They're built different, obviously. They're stronger, they're more flexible, possibly. They're adults. There's some issues, obviously, they have to be concerned with. But more importantly, there's major issues now that young kids are coming back. So what's the solution for these young kids that have not been playing a lot? Maybe they've been working out at home and doing whatever they can at home. And some of them may not even be practicing much because they may not have much time to practice. High school only practices maybe 20 times before the season, maybe even 15, 20 times before the season starts. Youth baseball, maybe even less. So what's your advice to coaches and parents? And by the way, folks, we talk about this on the show, Dr. Bob. When you talk about coaches and parents, you talk about parents. Parents are coaches in many ways. They're the largest, at least in baseball, they're the largest organization of coaches, even though they're not organized. They're the largest in the world, which means they influence the most our young people. And that's why it's so important to educate them. That's why you have the Hey Sports Parents, because those parents are also coaching. So what's your advice to these important people that are working with these young kids now that we're going to get back into sports, especially baseball? What's your advice to them to prepare the players better so there's a reduction of injuries?
Yeah, the word is graduality. It's very important to be aware of what you're talking about, that we know the pressure's on, and in some instances it might be too intense. So we want to be aware of the fact that we just want not to fall into the terrible twos, too much, too aggressive, too soon, to be aware of that. We also, if we're smart as a coach or parent, we will pay attention to what our son or daughter's history is.
Hmm.
If your son has a history of problems, then you want to make sure you've addressed it. The kid's always had knee trouble. Have you paid attention to it? He's always had foot ankle problems. Have you paid attention to it? Are you paying attention to it? Is he in the best shoe? For instance, for the sport that he or she is. So knowing your son or daughter's history makes a lot of sense. If you've been able to pay attention to at least, you want to use the term staying in shape, whether your son or daughter's been, throwing on their own, whether they've been able to at least do some at home, calisthenics, maybe they've been able, the gyms have been closed.
Right.
So I think the understanding is that we really, really need to be at most 50% intensity in the beginning, that first week or two, to see how healthy is my team?
Hmm.
How healthy is my son or daughter? I want to be talking to my son after the first week and during the first week, and I want to ask him how he's feeling. I don't want my son or daughter. His rule number one for a pearl from the sports doctor. If your son or son or daughter needs over-the-counter pain medicine to participate, you're over the line.
Hmm.
You got to understand what I use a term called, you can write this one down too. It's called intelligent rest. Intelligent rest means I don't care if you're the best ball player in the world or you're an 11-year-old little leaguer. A parent or coach needs to understand that we can't push through when things hurt and we're having problems. It doesn't mean, one of the worst things we ever did in the past, we say, hey, look, he's walking it off.
Yeah, right,
You know,
right, right.
let him
Or
walk it off.
go
So
ahead
we,
and just throw through it,
yes,
right?
we
When you're
want to be communicating with our team. We want to know how you guys doing. Number one, we want to be understanding that we want to be maybe 50% less aggressive. We want to say to the team, I need your feedback.
Mhm.
I can't have you, that now that your ankle's been bothering you because you didn't tell me 2 weeks ago and I still got you jumping rope, or we're running the bases, etc. And everybody's doing the same thing. Everybody's in the same color shoe because this is our team. But gee, this is the wrong shoe for you, maybe, possibly. So one of the goals of the sports doctor, using another sport is a quarterback. Do you want my advice to recommend smart, good nutrition? Do you want my advice to recommend top physical training places you could look or talk to? Do you want options to talk to top mental trainers? The mental game is a big deal on the sports doctor.
Mhm.
Whether we're talking about the dangers and concerns of concussions, which is a big deal, or whether we're talking about the role, like Jim Vickery would say to people, they were amazed, you could train your mental powers. And many times, then it was revolutionary. Eric Soderholm had a hypnotist he
Mhm.
worked with.
I remember that.
Right? They thought he was out of his mind. He was way ahead
Yes.
of the idea. Can you learn to calm down?
Yeah.
Can you sleep better?
Yeah.
So again, if your son or daughter needs pain medicine, you need to be investigating. Number one, you don't want to do that. Now, there are instances, if under supervision, if we've got the doctor supervising or the therapist is supervising, maybe that young boy or girl is taking ibuprofen or over-the-counter medicine for a week or two, and along with intelligent rest, along with identifying what the problem. If your son is a ball player and he's got a persistent problem, I don't care what it is, you want to pay attention to it.
Mm.
Whether it's he's got a low back problem. Go ahead.
And no, and that brings us up a point that one of my questions, and I want to ask about this because we're so interested in the arm injuries because there's so many of them, and I get that. So we want to make sure certain things they're doing right, so that way we can reduce that arm injury. But let me ask you, I mean, one of your specialization, like you said, was the ankle, the knees. If a lot of areas at the bottom of your body, ankles, knees, and if those are not working properly, does that not affect the
Bingo.
shoulder and the elbow?
Yes. Yes. The compensation, if you're hurting, well, I'm glad you brought that up because the whole world of cleats
Mm-hmm.
is something I just wrote about that for MVP Parent Magazine. Baseball also is like soccer, where they're introducing cleats very early,
Right.
8 years old, 9 years old, 7 years old, 10 years old. There's a large growth center on the bottom and the back of the heel that's susceptible to stress. So any boy or girl who might be doing a lot of running, jumping might aggravate that growth center.
Mm.
So sometimes the last thing we want to be doing in a growing kid is putting cleats underneath the heel, right on the bottom of that growth center. So sometimes important information like that, the rest of the body is affected by foot mechanics. Imagine your son or daughter has flat feet. Imagine their friend has high arches. Imagine the other ball player has knock knees. Imagine the other one has bow legs. Imagine the other one leg is longer than the other. All of these factors, once you start getting physical, 3, 4 times a week, every day, you're doing lots of running and jumping. It might surprise you. One of the great Joe Boyle, one of the great trainers of champions like Guido, like Gary Rhino, and like some of these others, he said to me, because I would have a contest every year, I would ask the audience, which sport do you think requires the best athlete? What would you say, Peter?
Best athlete,
Yeah,
gymnastics.
which sport do you think would require the best athlete?
Gymnastics, that'd be my first thought for some reason.
Basketball, running up and down the court?
Sure.
How about tennis, playing a five-setter physically? Then when I was incorporating this, I was including figure skating because Lysacek just won the gold medal. How about doing 500 triple jumps a week? But you want to know what Mr. Boyle said was that some of the best athletes in any sport he saw were
Hmm.
baseball players.
Wow.
This is, yes. I said, really? He
Yeah,
said, really?
that'd
He
be
said,
right.
I see great athletes in all the sports, and I was surprised. Not
Wow.
that I don't expect and see great athletes who are baseball players. They're
Sure.
just 3 inches taller now.
Right.
They're 6'3", 225 at shortstop.
Yeah, and they're
When
still
A-Rod was an oddball, that
right.
big,
Now
that
they're all
quick.
like that. Yep.
Exactly. And this is one of the challenges, again, but I call it, overkill. It means exactly what it says. And again, getting back to the basics of the safety of youth sports. Now, here's another chapter in my book.
Let me ask you real quick,
Go ahead.
because you mentioned the shoe. So our young kids in baseball, what shoes should they be wearing?
Great question. A multi-nub spread along the bottom of the sole where there's multiple nubs and there's not a cluster of cleats like the proverbial old baseball cleats that adults wear, or soccer, where
Right.
we've got cluster cleats right under the growth center. You can get shoes with cleats that have multiple cleats. What do I care if the kid's playing baseball in a low top football, a shoe that's got 100 cleats on the bottom? It doesn't matter. I do recommend again, because this is going to surprise you, but over 50% of us aren't fit properly.
Hmm.
If
Right.
that's even close, it's nuts.
The shoe, you mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're not fit properly. Very commonly, width might be involved. So we want you to be measured by a competent, usually running shoe stores have the most competent shoe fitters when it comes to size. And
Good to
even
know.
some of them have a New Balance has been famous because they've always paid attention to width.
Yeah.
But when you have a persistent lower extremity problem, whether it's your back, whether it's your hips or knees, whether it's your feet and ankles, if it's persistent, foot mechanics are related. Foot mechanics are related. Half the people I see who are active, Peter, who have knee trouble, are orthotics many times patients. And orthotics, again, is my specialty.
Hmm.
It is custom measured insoles.
I'm still
Whether,
wearing yours.
yes,
I feel
take good out of you. You got it in your shoe. We can see what the date is.
I had it
I
upstairs.
don't believe it. You flunked the test. At least you could have done, it's a
I'm not
funny story.
I'm
It's a
not
funny,
wearing shoes. Look.
okay, see, it's right. Yes. It's a funny story. We were at a National Fitness Hall of Fame dinner, and Bob Guide is being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award. It's 2 years before I was honored to be inducted in 1989. And one of our old friends, you might remember Phil Clausen.
Yep.
Phil Clausen, Phil Clausen was a team handball Olympian when I saw him as a 16, 17-year-old, and we were putting orthotics into his shoes. His parents had bunions, etc. And we did that whenever it was. And there he is I haven't seen him, and there he is at the dinner, a couple of, whatever it is, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm going, Phil, I give him a big hug. He gives me a big hug for fun. As he's walking away, I slapped him on the shoulder. I said, hey, man, how's the orthotics? He says, wait a second, takes his shoe off. He takes out his orange plastic orthotic that says Phil Clausen 1978 on it.
Wow.
Right, man. So I said it was one of the two reasons, man, that I always paid big attention to that. Number one, those kinds of flexible plastic devices can last for years.
Mhm.
And in most instances, the principle is simple. It is to put your body in its best alignment.
Hmm.
It is to help put your body in its best alignment. So when you're looking to get out of the batter's box, those first couple of steps, if you're looking for quickness, changing direction, then you want to strengthen your feet and ankles. In my book, I have a chapter, and I call it the 2 essential exercises for, I don't care if you're a baseball player or whatever, and if you're a youth, especially boy or girl, this doesn't exclude other exercises. I just want you to include them, and you'll know this. One is rubber bands for your feet and ankles,
Hmm.
which you remember
Mhm.
like it was yesterday, is a big part of what you were doing when you were around us,
Yep.
where you could strengthen all the muscles in the lower leg with simple rubber band resistance. and whether you're 10 years old or the best athlete in the country or pro, and include balance work in your exercises. You remember, Gaida, I've got slides of John McEnroe and Jim McMahon and Walter Payton and Pete Caliendo balancing on mini trampolines and playing catch and standing on tilt boards and walking on Gaida's famous oscillating balance beam. And it all was to strengthen what Gaida would call the stabilizers. So whether you're coming down from making a great play in the outfield or you're trying to change direction on the dime, those fast twitch fibers you can help strengthen. Ironically, it's the same exercise you might use in your 90-year-old great grandfather to try to prevent him from falling. So
You know what's interesting there? You guys were way ahead of your time, and I'll tell you why.
they're
Because
catching up, but yes.
you're doing it for that particular reason. There's a lot of coaches doing it now and specialists doing it for, to train the body to be a little bit uncomfortable. So that way it's easy
Exactly.
when you go on the baseball
You
field.
got to adapt.
Yeah.
Gaida would spend time teaching how he'd teach Buckner how to fall.
Yeah.
And when Billy came to us, they said the guy's got a bad ankle, man. He's got a bad ankle. He's got a bad ankle. He left here. He had more at bats than anybody else in Cubs history, whatever it was.
Almost 3,000 hits.
Yes, but he was great with the kids, and he was a spokesman for cystic fibrosis, called the 65 Roses Club. Billy was a great guy. I was shocked when I found out that he had passed away with this dementia. I didn't even know he was dealing with it. I did know 2 years before that he didn't remember me. I was very suspicious because I knew him very, very well. But the two concepts, again, include strengthening your feet and ankles and include balance. If I put measurement devices all over your body from your head to your toes, and I put you on an unstable surface, every light will light up. You're using all those balance stabilizers, and you use them all the time in sports, whether you're swinging a tennis racket, whether you are slowing down that motion. A guy, I'm making him famous again. He'd say work the opposites.
Yeah.
So if you're a baseball player and you're trying to go through the kinds of things that you're doing, then you're working these systems. Now, again, injuries still happen. You can be the best trained guy. You fall wrong, you hit the wall, you hit that crazy base the wrong way, you get injured. But it's interesting. We always put ice on it.
Yep.
The Rice principles: rest, ice, compression, elevation, right? Everybody knows it. The man who invented that saying, Dr. How can I forget his name? It'll hit me again. Mark, yeah, you have the book. Mark Kaufman, I think it is. Who wrote that Rice Principles. When Gary Reinl got the second edition of his book, the doctor said, I was wrong. Gary was saying ice will numb an area. It will help with pain. After that, it slows down healing.
Yep.
Which shocked a lot of us. Yep. And think about it. It congests that area and doesn't allow the exchange of good fluids in, damaged fluids out, and those kinds of concepts. So injuries happen. What does Gary do instead of that? He calls it reciprocal muscle action. Work the areas around it. So if your ankle is injured, and he says if you have motion, you could don't do what hurts, but you might wiggle your toes, and you might bend your knee, and you might be activating muscles that surround what was injured. So the idea of what's done with an initial injury, acute injury, has changed, somewhat compared to one of our biggest problems, which is overuse or repetitive motion injuries.
And that's, perfect segue. Again, folks, on the show, we just go at it and ask, talk and ask questions as we go along. We don't have a script. Perfect question, because here's what I wanted to ask. to our coaches that are working with, I'm going to talk about 12 and under, especially because when you're talking about abuse or overuse, I should say, what's the solution in baseball when it comes to, and I know everybody's not the same, every kid's not the same, but what's the solution as far as, number of games, number of practices? And you mentioned, multi-sport athletes. Some of our kids right now, 8 years old, all they're doing is all year round playing baseball and practicing baseball.
Well, you have to understand again that we have overkill up to our ears.
Yeah.
This is not maybe, this is not could be. And all the great organizations, iSport 360 with Ian Goldberg, which is apt to get coaches and parents communicating,
Mm-hmm.
pays attention to this. Whether it's my friends at the National Alliance of Youth Sports, which has been around since 1981, including this in their coaching of coaches, Park District and other kinds of coaches, to get them to understand, to be aware that we're already over the line. Playing a double header with youngsters is just no way, let alone playing a triple header in hockey, because we got to do it because there's not enough time. So you need to understand, to communicate with your youngsters to find out how you're feeling with the practices we've been doing,
Mm.
with the understanding that it's probably too much. If you shouldn't be probably playing more than once a week, and you shouldn't be practicing more than a couple of days. Every day is out, unless you might do a day or two a week on mental training. Remember Jim Vickery? My son was in a dark theater laying down, imagining he hit a home run
Yeah.
at 10 years old and rounding the bases and feeling good about it. He
Yeah.
was working visualization.
Breathing too.
Sada home, when Eric did his baseball camps, I'm reading his script because Eric did all his rehab with Bob Guida.
Yeah.
Eric came as a guy who had videos working with Nautilus. And, Guida would say, hey, overkill with different things. So we know injuries are part of the game. We want to be able to communicate. And getting back to your exact question, we want to be gradual. We want to look at our schedule and understand, number one, that playing the game every day is too much. Doing things that are the same, running, jumping activities of 12-year-olds every day is out. It's overkill. You'll hurt them.
And we got to remember, doctor, that these kids already went without the pandemic. These kids are already doing that naturally, so they're already doing some of that because they're playing on their own.
Exactly. We want to understand again that we want to communicate. If I have my team who's running a mile, was running a half a mile, and they're running a mile. They've been doing it to 3 days a week for a week or two. I want to sit down. I want to find out. Would you raise your hand if you're hurting? Nobody's raising their hand. I'll know. Well, not bad. I can pay attention to that. If I see half the class raises their hand, again, explosive running in baseball, what's it got to do with jogging? What were pitchers ever doing jogging?
Right.
But Guy would laugh at that.
Right.
What are you doing jogging
Now
if
they
you're a
don't
pitcher?
talk anymore.
But yet I got a question for you. With all our science, you don't have anybody going pitching a full game.
Nope.
You have all these arm problems. You have every expert in the world around all these pitchers. You got the nutritionists and right, all these things we're talking about. Yet, if you said, these pitchers years ago who would pitch, complete games and throw 200 innings, and I don't know, you didn't see the amount of arm problems, did you?
Right. Right. No, you
It's
didn't.
overkill.
Yeah.
It is understanding we're already over the line. So again, when you're talking with children, you need to listen to these
Doctor,
kids.
speaking about overkill, what about kids? Because you mentioned multi-sport athletes. I look at Major League Baseball players when they did a study. It was like 95 and above were multi-sport athletes. I
Yes,
had a golf expert on. They said that the top PGA people, there's only one they can find that was not a multi-sport athlete.
yes.
My question is this: it's good to be okay. You're 12 and under. It's good to play multiple sports. But then what about what you're talking about, the pounding, the issue with the ankles and all
Got
this?
to pay attention.
Okay.
It's individual. You
Yeah.
need to pay attention subjectively for your son or daughter. We might see, gee, this kid's never had problems. Every year he plays, his knees hurt.
But it's okay
And
to play four sports.
within reason, it is. Again, my son used to take the basketball and put it back in his locker and take his glove out of his locker in
Right.
high school and went
Right.
from one to another. We
Yep.
thought it was normal then. Baseball players at the major league level would take an off season. What, are you kidding? You couldn't sell that now. You wouldn't make the team. The
Right.
question is, if we gone way overboard in the other, and to apply that to young children is just stupid.
And we're training in the winter too, in the cold areas,
You
indoors.
can now. I just had a guest last week, Teresa Power. Next week is International Kids Yoga Day. She's been doing that to sixth anniversary, 30 countries, hundreds of thousands of kids. The idea of yoga, not being tremendously healthy, reducing stress, all these things our children are undergoing. Do you think there's any 12-year-old in the world, in the United States right now, who's not stressed to this extreme with
Absolutely.
what they've been going through,
Yeah.
let alone throwing another regimen in? So we need to be careful with, again, being too aggressive
Mm.
and to being a good listener. Foot ankle problems are common when we see lots of running. So we pay attention to also weight training very early. Unless you know what you're doing, you need supervision in your balance work or your rubber band work. So I say to parents all the time, go to a good physical therapist and at the very least learn the at home. When I have young kids who are figure skating 10 days a week, they don't got time to go to work with a trainer necessarily. They're doing stuff at home. And they're doing stuff at home that they've learned. We would have them balance on boards and do bands, but you need to learn the technique. And you can go to a good physical therapist, sports therapist, who could show your son or daughter who's a baseball player what he or she could be doing, guide, all that rubber band and elastic tubing that they
Mm-hmm.
might be doing to work the opposites and to try to do their best to get ready. But also, again, don't leave out the lower extremity. But once you start adding running to a 12-year-old's or younger's regimen, then you've got to be paying attention to, again, is this young boy playing baseball in running shoes? Running shoes are made for one foot in front of the other. Running shoes are not made for side to side.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll see with these youngsters, we'll catch these kids, half of them got running shoes on. Coach doesn't necessarily know better. We don't need a name brand, but we need to be fit properly and to be in a shoe that's designed for the vigors of the sport, and at least pay attention. The most common problem in heels in young boy, I used to call it young boys running, jumping heels, no more. Right? The most common problem with heels is that irritation of the growth center. It's not swollen, it's not red and inflamed. It hurts sometimes, then it doesn't, then it does. Once it becomes consistent, you've got to pay attention. It's one of the big reasons we'll use orthotics and shoes eventually. If your son or daughter was born with flat feet, or there's a term called pronation, supination are the normal foot and ankle motions, and there are three motions in three directions. Only your wrists have more sophistication, really, than your feet and ankles,
Mm.
as far as motion is concerned. And you ain't walking on your wrists.
Right.
Although I gave a talk, you'll laugh at this. I gave a talk to a bunch of young gymnasts and their families years ago, and I said that you don't walk on your
We
wrists. And
walk
they
on
say,
the wrist.
yeah, hey, Dr. Bob, I got news for you.
Yeah.
She was walking on her wrist. I said, hey, I stand corrected. But weight bearing is a whole different animal, especially when we're stressing. And, foot type can be inherited. So, if your mother and your grandmother had bunions or hammer toes, these kinds of conditions that are common, getting a podiatrist involved in identifying for you whether your son or daughter would benefit from a shoe change and whether they've got a history of problems, and paying attention to orthotics, which is a step up in many instances. And one of our biggest weapons when there's trouble, again, like shin splints or foot and ankle problems, orthotics are terrific. Um, I'm not a big fan of inserts over the counter, and there are a million of them, or
Yes.
online. I want some feedback of a podiatrist or a podorthist who knows shoes and the mechanics of the foot. Every time you land on your heel, every step you and I take, pronation allows you to absorb shock. About half your weight gets up your foot and that leg, up your legs, every step you take. You're doing a triple jump in skating, you might be coming down with 8 times your weight. If
Wow.
you're running and jumping, you're tripling those forces.
Wow.
So what if you have one leg slightly longer than the other?
Yeah.
We see that. So getting a good physical exam, including physical therapy. Does your son or daughter have challenges in flexibility? Do they have challenges in strength with their range of motion? This is smart. In order to do the two things, Peter, that you could write these down, the two things everybody cares about. You ready? Number one, can I prevent injuries?
Yep.
Can I prevent problems? And number two, when indicated, can I enhance performance? Can I be a step or two quicker?
Yep.
Can I be more explosive? Can I get better balance?
Yeah.
And then no matter what the sport is, but again, as you see in your sport, where sometimes we don't realize there's year-round baseball. The reason A-Rod probably got involved in the world of something to do with performance-enhancing drugs is his father probably pushed it on him in many instances. And I'll give you another pearl. I have a new name for performance-enhancing drugs. Are you ready? We know there are cheaters. There always have been.
Right.
But the main reason is performance surviving drugs.
Yeah.
Playing hurt,
Makes sense.
trying to get back on the field before you're ready.
Yep.
The tremendous pressures. When I interview the team physician, like at the Yankees, or Brian Cole is the team orthopedist of the Bulls and White Sox, and I say, what are those pressures like? When you're talking about, and there are sports parents and sports coaches, them, that have the same intensity. What do you mean your feet still hurt? Tough it out. Hey, look, my son takes 2 Advil before every game, Dr. Weil. If he doesn't, his ankles hurt. Now, this is already when we need intelligent rest. We need to back off. We need to identify why his feet and ankles are bothering him. And we got to pay attention again to the coach being educated or the parent, because sports parents are wonderful until there's a problem.
Right.
And I ask all the time, experts like you in your world, how your sports psychology skills are.
Yeah.
How are they, Pete? How are those?
They need to get
right?
better all the time. That's the most important one right there.
It is.
As a coach.
And it ain't getting any easier.
No.
When we are seeing all sports with bigger, faster, stronger athletes, the explosion of the young girl and female athlete is just amazing. And the knee problems in young girls with wider hips, a little bit different angle down to the knee, is one of the big reasons we put orthotics in girls' shoes to try to stay out of trouble. There are still 5-to-1 knee ACL injuries, girls to boys. And softball and girls softball is as big a deal for you as boys and men's baseball, isn't it?
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One day I walked into a batting cage. I was with Guy and a few others. Before I got there, I heard the crack of the bat. I said, I don't know who this kid is, And we walked in. It was a couple of girls, 14-year-olds, who I just could not believe the bat speed and the athleticism of these girls. But the biomechanics, girls also the hormones, as young girls become women, menstrual cycles, things like that. But flexibility, where hormones, the same hormones that allow a woman to deliver a baby, be stretchable enough, are the same kind of hormones that pay, I believe, situations into knee trouble when we have some of these girl softball players. I would put them all in orthotics proactively,
And,
besides strengthening.
and you know what? I'm glad you brought the orthotics up. And folks, we got about 15 minutes left. And this has been fantastic because I just want to say,
You want
30
me to
years.
show you a typical orthotic we use if you give me 10 seconds to go get it?
Yeah, and I'll talk to the
Count
audience.
down, 12 down, 12, 11.
Coach Dr. Weil will be here in a second. He's going to get the folks, thanks for joining us on Baseball Outside the Box. And don't forget our folks in Honolulu, ESPN. Thank you for joining us. Any questions on Facebook? Do me a favor. We got a lot of, this is an important topic. Go ahead and type it in the comments section. If you got any, questions for Dr. Bob, we got some great stuff. We're going to
It is.
off with the
I'm
mental.
coming, Peter.
So Dr. Weil's back. And
Yeah, man.
Dr. Bob, the reason I brought the orthotics up 30 years ago when I came to you, I was playing competitive racquetball, very high competitive.
I remember.
And there's no doubt about it. I mean, I'm not just saying it. It solved my problem because I didn't no longer have.
There aren't many physical sports more. It's funny. When we were looking at pickleball now, we're talking about oldest people playing, running around, changing direction, and I make the analysis or comparison. Some of the best athletes I ever saw, Marty Hogan was one of them, were racquetball players.
Mhm.
Lightning speed, quick, athletic movements. This is an example of what you're in.
That's what I got.
Yes, a unbreakable, flexible plastic that's made from a cast impression of the foot. And I still use messy plaster. I don't like the fancy gadgets that you walk across or some of the molds that you might stick your foot in. But again, I have a bottom line. Again, if you've got a history or your player has a history of lower extremity problems, that doesn't mean he went to lift the bookshelf and hurt his back. We're saying he needs orthotics.
Right.
But if we're saying your son or daughter's been complaining for years, whether they've been to a chiropractor or not, or whatever, about their back or their hips or their knees or their feet, ankles, orthotics are a weapon. Or when we have somebody who's very talented, and even though they don't have a history of injury, this is one of the things we're looking for a step or two. When the foot is aligned to push you off, one of the jobs of the orthotic is to get the foot to move from a flexible bag of bones that absorbs impact and shapes to the ground. Think of yourself walking barefoot on the grass. Pronation allows your foot to shape to the grass.
Mhm.
Once you bear weight, the job of the foot is to become like a lever and push you off. It's called supinated. If you don't supinate on time, you're a step slow. So this is one of the things we pay attention to when we're looking at the role of orthotics with a top boy or girl, and we're trying to do two things, stay out of trouble. And my experience is orthotics help prevent problems as far as overuse, prevent wear and tear, the same low back or knees or hips. When half the country has arthritis on their ankles and hips and knees, my question is, how come? What about the joints and alignment? So again, if you're going to play a sport like baseball seriously, or any sport with a growing kid, then we want to be aware of those things we talked about. Does he have pronated feet? What's his history? What is her history? Your team tomorrow, you could ask them, who's hurting? Who's had problems and who's paying attention to them? And you could be talking to the parents, Jane mentioned her knees are always bothering her. Have you? Now, much more attention is being paid. Problem is, it's gone to the other extreme sometimes, where we see, again, that off-sport training is too much, where we're doing certain things. So you can do safe things like balance and rubber bands and not run and jump on off days. You could work balance all the time, man. I'll, stand on one foot. One of guide's great exercises, looking at you as an athlete. I'd have you standing in front of me in shorts, barefoot, and I'd ask you to do a partial knee bend.
Mhm.
And I'd take a look at that stability. And guide who would say, if the guy's unstable, balancing on one foot, how do you expect him to be jumping for rebounds or running and jumping?
Yeah.
So he would pay attention to strengthening all those areas. And I would pay attention to the alignment
Mm.
regarding that, high arch or those flat feet or et cetera. But again, the book, it's on Amazon, hashtag HeySportsParents, or also, this is great, it's a quarterly. If you go to mvpparent.com, you'll see the issue. And you know what the article was in this magazine that I wrote? The prodigy sports.
Wow.
My article was about exactly what we're talking about, early specialization. And if people want to go to my website, Peter, sportsdoctorradio.com, they could hear radio shows, they could find out about the book and all of this stuff. And I'll look forward to getting you back.
Yeah, and we got time still, but I want to,
Good.
Doc, we're going to put all the stuff on our show
Yeah, you
notes.
know what happens when I'm a host, man. I once I get going, I'm in trouble.
That's all right, but I want to jump to this because it's so important in your book also, because we're talking about two issues here. We were talking about the physical issue, the abuse,
Yes.
overuse, but I really also want to hit on the mental part. I want you to talk to the parents, coaches that I work
Are you
with.
having fun?
I'm having a great time.
No, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to you as a sports parent.
Right,
I'm
right, but
I'm talking to that young boy or girl with your question right now.
right.
I am asking my son or daughter, are you enjoying the sport? And I want you to talk about what you think is good or challenging about it. And I want to be aware of that. Because if we see, like Dr. Vickery, should rest in peace, says, it becomes drill for that young athlete, you're in trouble as far as them, whatever, whether it's, I call them Svengali coaches,
Right.
where we've got these, and everybody knows what I'm talking about. Every club sport that I've worked with, including baseball, where we have the tendency for know-it-alls and for just too much. So again, your question is to be a listener and find out again, is your son or daughter enjoying what they're doing? And are they hurting? How are they doing physically? And again, how do they think about that whole physical, rather mental game? And I find that kids are very attentive when I tell them about my young skaters visualizing and my son watching himself hitting a home run and telling that kid how this is as good for you as practicing. There was a study done real quickly. It was in free throws, foul shooting.
Mhm.
One group worked it physically, shooting free throws. The other group did it mentally. The results were the same. They both improved dramatically. So the idea of including that you can strengthen, like you could strengthen your biceps, you could strengthen your resolve, your commitment, your understanding of the sport, what it takes.
Mhm.
Being a competitive youngster is not for everybody. It's not, and this is a family thing. This is like, I've had experts on, they talked about the financial strain
Oh,
of
sure.
travel and clubs and all of these things.
Yep.
And mostly some parents are really surprised when they hear, my own son, I would say, he'd say to me, Dad, how come yours was the only voice I heard, on the sidelines? I thought I was cheering,
Right.
you
But
know,
and that's my point. The thing I wanted to bring up, I think that's another great point there. a lot of these parents are coaching. Okay. Now, a lot of times we're not aware of some of the things we say, how we say them. So talk about, what a coach should be careful in what they're saying. Because when they're talking about mental abuse, a lot of times, we don't even know we're doing it. Maybe
Yes,
we think we're doing
absolutely.
saying the right thing.
Yes. One of the great parts of the books is there's about 20 cartoons, and they are all about all of these different types of subjects. One of them shows a bunch of screaming, cheering people. And the caption is, that's not even the parents, it's the grandparents. So I think we have to understand that kids who are playing are listening and they are paying attention and
Mhm.
understanding. Again, once you become a critic, you're over the line. I had a youngster. He was a little leaguer. I coached little league. He played with my son. It's years ago. He was a great player. I remember a particular game. He misjudged a pop up. His father wouldn't stop with the ranting and raving. The next year, I'm having a meeting with some of the kids, and I'm saying, Jerry, I'm paraphrasing his name. Hey, you're playing. I don't want to play.
Mm.
What do you mean you don't want to play? And years later, I found out one of the really reasons was that incident of an overzealous dad belittling him, making fun of him because he misplayed something. So understanding that the kids really, really are listening. And Vickery would say, don't be a critic. And he said, again, if you're on the sidelines, if you don't have something good to say, don't say it. Um, Enjoy, communicate with your youngster. Years ago, that wasn't done. The parents stayed out of it. Many
Right.
times, coaches, especially, being a parent coach, good luck to us. But there are great programs out there. You're part of it. You're part of a lot of it. You bring up these great points. And the reality is that parents, especially, and coaches need to continue to be educated.
Hmm.
We want a well-centered, well-developed young boy or girl who comes out of a top baseball, softball program. We don't want pros who are 1/10 of 1%, or even college scholarship athletes who were something percent. We want to include, yes, when we've got a serious kid, we want a serious program, but yelling, the days of Bobby Knight, the idea of intimidation, number one, doesn't work, and everybody hates it.
Yep.
We don't like it. So I think, we still need to listen to your kind of feedback and your kind of, getting together. I do the same thing on the Sports Doctor, where I try to bring together. I consider myself so educated because I've had 1,000 guests, give or take a few, on who
Exactly.
knows how many topics. And this is amazing. And of course, the pandemic, Peter, has magnified this times 100
Hmm.
in so many areas. Whether you're a parent, you don't know if your kid's in school, they're not in school. I just started getting a figure skating mom this morning. And now that my daughter, who does double jump, she's 10 years old and overdo it. But now that school's starting, we have to, again, between off ice training, and my coach recommended a training program. I said, forget it, because again, let's not add something else. So I think communication has come a long way, baby. I really do. Um, but we continue to have to stress the same thing. It's like Jack Nicklaus said, when I'm giving someone a lesson, I ain't teaching them something new, man. I'm telling them, pay attention to what you already know what is. And it's no different in what we're doing.
Speaking about communication, let's close it off with this. I think it'd be a great way to close it. That dreadful ride home when I have a bad game. I'm 12 years old. What's your advice to
Don't be
parents?
a critic.
Yeah, yeah. But what about now if the player brings?
I think you can communicate. You could understand that your son or daughter is disappointed.
Mhm.
You could understand they're embarrassed. We sure don't need to go far back to remember ourselves. Don't be a critic.
Yeah.
You can give positive feedback in order, I think, to enhance things. But in that ride home, And when we get an angry, for Christ's sake, I told you to pay attention, and yada, yada, is never productive. If you could find, hey, let's say let's say my son had a tough game, and I picked out the fact his teammate had some great things, and I spoke about that, and I used that as an example. I wasn't a critic, and I wanted to listen. I wanted to find out how they did, and I wanted to add my 2 cents about how we can improve things.
Mhm.
Jim Vickery would say, how
Yeah,
could we improve things, Johnny?
yeah.
I'll help you. Let's work together. And to that in capitals, not to be a critic. I know it's tough. But if we tell each other sometimes the same thing 100 times, we'll learn. You want to know what the irony is? Everything improves when we pay attention, especially with kids, to paying attention to what's positive. Everything improves, and you help everything. And today, with the pressures and bullying and
Yes,
online, it's good luck to all of us. You know what I mean?
absolutely. Dr. Bob, I said finish it off, but how about last, nugget of wisdom for our parents? Anything else that we wanted to address that we kind of didn't that's important? And we'll close it off with that, man.
I think paying attention to enjoying, you're very lucky. I miss going to the games, man.
Oh, yeah.
When my son was playing and daughter, I missed the part of the coaching. It flies by. And I think you've got to, again, the word mindfulness that medicine didn't know how to spell 20 years ago, being in the moment and enjoying the fact that your kid is doing something healthy and being competitive, pays a lot of attention. And I think parents paying attention to those things is really, really what counts. But you want to communicate if your son or daughter is dealing with problems, whether it is physically or mentally. You want to find that out and listen.
I was going to say, God bless my parents, because when I was young playing Little League, they would come to the game. They didn't know much about baseball, but they come to the game, and they were great. They would always try to be in an area where I couldn't see them that much, because they knew that there was a lot of pressure on the field, for these young kids, and they just wanted you to enjoy the game and not worry about what the
Yeah,
parents.
it's always been a great balancing act, whether or not when you talk to a young boy or girl, whether for the most part, they absolutely would love their mom and dad there, the
Sure.
family, they're there. On the other hand, again, there's that side of pressure, and that's a good sometimes topic to bring up with
Yeah.
your young athlete. But Peter, it's been great.
Thank you.
Again, if people want to catch my show, I'm live, 3 o'clock Central Standard Time, The Sports Doctor on PBS Radio. If people go to sportsdoctorradio.com, they could find out about all sorts of stuff. Again, I have over 30,000 followers on Twitter. We have a lot of great information on Twitter and LinkedIn at SportsDoc, DOC Radio. But it's been great to be with you. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to have you.
I'm so excited for you. I'm
Thank you.
not surprised that you're doing what you're doing. And we'll catch each other again. We'll catch up again. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doctor. We'll have everything on the show notes. We'll have it all over our social media. Folks, Dr. Bob. Thank you, Dr. Bob Weil. Thank you to Brian Crocker, our producer with the Lineup Media Group. Thanks to everybody in the U.S. and around the world. Don't forget, go to baseballoutsidethebox.com and subscribe. Also go to YouTube, Peter Caliendo. Folks, enjoy opening day. Stay healthy.
Yes, opening day. Oh my gosh.
Eat safe. God bless you all. Yes, wear your mask, wash your hands, and by the way, stay healthy, right?
Yes,
Exercise.
go Cubs.
There you go. Go Cubs. God bless you all. See you in the next show, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Pete. Pete, I'll contact you.